Welcome everyone to our series on the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, the 7 universal, God-given Noahide commandments. Just a very brief introduction, bit of an overview. God created the world, placed man on this world, and there's a purpose. To use the words that Hasidic philosophy quotes, it is to make a dwelling place for God. He wants to be present, to be felt, to be revealed in this physical world, which by nature conceals over godliness. This world is the lowest of the low, and this is where God Almighty wants to, as it were, reside or be, although He's everywhere and He's beyond time and space, of course. Some 2,500 years after the creation, there was the great historic revelation at Sinai, known as Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, the divine law. Now, the Torah, of course, was given to the Jewish nation and to the Jewish nation only. However, at that time, God gave the Jewish people the mandate to inform all of mankind of their obligations, of their responsibility to keep their 7 commandments, which originally 6 of them were commanded to Adam, to the first man, and then after the great flood, those 6 plus a 7th were reiterated and given to Noach, to Noah, and from then on, all of mankind has to keep these commandments. And after Matan Torah, after the giving of Torah, now all of mankind has to keep them because they were given by God through Moses, through the Jewish people. The Torah in general has 2 parts to it, in general. The written law and the oral law, the oral tradition, both given by God to Moses, to the Jewish people. The written law, the 5 books of Moses, and then the prophets and the scriptures, known as Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, in a sense, contains everything. However, it's written in a sort of cryptic way. Out of the 613 commandments, which that's our tradition in the oral law, that there are 613 commandments for the Jewish people, not one of them would be able to be fully and properly understood by just reading the original text of the written law. So we must have the oral tradition. When I say the oral tradition, I don't mean rules and regulations and boundaries and fences and customs that were instituted by the rabbis throughout the generations. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the unbroken chain of the interpretation that God gave Moses and told him to give it on to the Jewish people and to convey that from generation to generation. And that is just as God-given as the written law. And it's all given over orally, and it was only years later where it had to be written down. And that is basically the Talmud, the Mishneh, and then the Gemara. And then many commentaries to explain what that means, and so on. After the conclusion of all of the written and oral law, after the Gemara, the Talmud, was completed, came along one of the greatest human beings ever to walk the face of the earth, one of the greatest sages of the Jewish nation ever, and that is Maimonides, Moses Maimonides. Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimon HaSfaradi, known as the Rambam, which is the acronym for Rabbi Moshe, son of Maimon. That was his father. Rambam. And he was the only one who took all of the oral tradition, all of the oral law, all of the Talmud, and presents it in a very clear, in a very concise way, giving us all of Jewish law. For all 613 commandments, and actually plus the 7 rabbinic commandments, total of 620. Every single mitzvah, every single commandment, and all of the laws. Doesn't go into reason, doesn't go into discussions. He's just telling us, he teaches us in a very systematic way, in a very organized way. The name of the series, of the set of the books, he named it Mishneh Torah, and it's called by many the Yad HaChazaka, otherwise just simply called the Rambam. In the Mishneh Torah, he has 14 books, beginning with the book of knowledge and concluding with number 14, the book of Judges. Each book is comprised of sections of topics called halachas, laws. Each law then is broken down into chapters, and every chapter has what we call small halachas, meaning paragraphs, segments within each chapter. In total, within these 14 books, there are a total of 83 halachas, 83 topics. And if you count up the chapters, the way we have them now, there are some 1,000 chapters. And this was written about 900 years ago. He is the greatest codifier. For one, he is the only one in all of rabbinic literature that took every topic and all of the laws of the Torah, including those which unfortunately are not relevant on a practical level in practice during the exile, when the Jewish people don't have the Holy Temple, and when most of the Jewish people are living in the diaspora. He included all the laws. Every single mitzvah, not only those that are relevant, such as Jewish holidays and the Sabbath and laws of kosher and prayer and civil laws, etc., but he also included any and every single mitzvah, laws of sacrifices, laws of the service in the Holy Temple by the priests and the Levites, laws of tithing the land, laws of the sabbatical year, the Jubilee year, etc. And he even includes those laws which will be only relevant in the Messianic era, because he is giving us all of Judaism, all of the laws, the God-given laws, he's presenting here. Now, as we come close to the very end of the entire Mishneh Torah of the Rambam, in the 14th book, the book of Shoftim, book of Judges, in the laws of kings, those are the final laws, the 83rd laws are the laws of kings. And the laws of kings have 12 chapters. Basically, the first chapters are discussing what is the Torah mandate for a king. How is the Jewish king supposed to conduct himself? What is the mitzvah of appointing a king? And how is his government supposed to work and supposed to look like? What are his obligations? What is he supposed to do? And how does he go to war? All the rules of war, of kings and war. And then, in chapter 8, he discusses a mitzvah of Eishes Yefas Toyar, of the beautiful woman in captive, that is, in the enemies, in the non-Jewish enemy, that a Jew wants to take as a captive, and then he wants to marry her. That's kind of the segue of how that leads into the 7 Noahide commandments. At the very end of chapter 8 of the Laws of Kings, where he's concluding the discussion on this Yifas Toyar, on this woman who the Jewish soldier who took her back with him as a prisoner of war, and he would like to marry her. So, can he convert her? Does she need to be converted? There's very specifics. So we're going to see inside the last halacha, the last paragraph, the last law of this chapter, and then the following chapters 9 and 10 are clearly devoted to the 7 Noahide commandments. They're written for the Jewish people to know how to instruct and how to teach and how to guide the non-Jewish world. I see absolutely nothing wrong with a non-Jew learning those 2 chapters directly from the Rambam inside. He wrote them in Hebrew, and, of course, the entire Rambam is translated. But chapters 9 and 10 in the Laws of Kings, those are the laws for the non-Jew. And the reason they appear, again, in the Mishneh Torah for the Jew is, as the Rambam is going to explain, it's actually the duty and the obligation of the Jew to teach and instruct the non-Jew. But before we get to chapter 9, as I said, let's see the last halacha in chapter 8. So this is the Laws of Kings, chapter 8, halacha 10. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher, Lo hinchil ha-Torah v'ha-mitzvos elo Yisrael, did not give as an inheritance the Torah and the commandments to anyone other than the Jewish people. Shene'emar, as it is stated, Moirasha Kehilas Yaakov, an inheritance for the congregation of Jacob. This is a verse towards the end of the 5 books of Moses, of the Bible. Very famous verse. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, Moses has commanded us, the Jewish people. Moirasha, an inheritance, Kehilas Yaakov, for the Jewish congregation, for the congregation of Jacob. So if you're not Jewish, the Torah does not belong to you. Continues the Rambam. And to anyone who wants to convert from the rest of the nations. So we do have an opening. We do have the option. According to Torah law, according to God, a non-Jew from any of the other nations of the world who would like to become a Jew can. He's not a Jew by birth. He can become Jewish. He can convert and become a Jew. And then he has the Torah, just like the Jewish people. Shene'emar, because there's a verse which states, Kachem kager. This is a verse in the book of Numbers, and it says over there that these laws are eternal, and you have to keep them. Kachem, just like you, speaking to the Jews, kager, as the convert. So this verse is clearly alluding to the fact that the Jew, as well as the ger, have the exact same position when it comes to mitzvahs, to commandments. As I mentioned, when it comes to understanding the laws, so you would not know a single mitzvah properly just from the written law. So many times when we make a reference to a verse, one might feel that, oh, that seems to be a little bit far-fetched, or who says that's the meaning of the verse? Remember, there is the oral law that God told Moses, this is what I mean when I tell you these words. So I want you to write down in the Torah scroll, ink on parchment, the following verse using these words. But here is what I mean, and here is the deeper, hidden meaning to these words. Now continues the Rambam. But whoever did not want, If you have a non-Jew that doesn't want to become Jewish, ein koifin oisoi, he is not to be forced lekabel Torah umitzvahs, to accept Torah and its commandments and the commandments. Okay, again, this is coming after the Fas Toyar story. Basically, the Jewish people are not to force anyone to become Jewish. So in our religion, in the God-given Jewish religion, Jews do not proselytize. We do not seek converts. The option is there. The opening is there. And if someone does not want to become Jewish, we do not force them. V'chein tziva Moshe Rabbeinu. And likewise, Moses, our teacher, commanded, mipi hagvura, from, so to say, the mouth of the Almighty, lakuf es kol ba'ei ha'olam, to force all of the inhabitants of the world, every human being that's not Jewish, lekabel, to accept, mitzvos, the commandments, shnitztavu v'nei Noach, that the sons of Noah, that the descendants of Noah, which is every human being, were commanded. So the Jewish people were given the Torah and the mitzvahs, the commandments. We do not force it upon any non-Jew. However, Moses was commanded by God that the Jewish people are to force the non-Jewish world, all the nations of the world, to keep the seven, well, I didn't say seven yet, I'm sorry, to keep the commandments that were commanded to the descendants of Noah. The chol mi shelo yekabel, and anyone who will not accept them, yeh hareg, shall be put to death, shall be killed. V'hamekabel oison, and the one that does accept them, hu hanikra ger toishav b'chol makim. He is the one who is called with the title of ger toishav, resident alien, b'chol makim, everywhere. Throughout the Talmud, and then, of course, throughout the Rambam, we now have a term, well, he's used it before, but he's telling us the term ger toishav. So again, ger toishav is a technical, legal term for a very specific type of a person. Cannot be a Jew. If he's Jewish, he's not a ger toishav. A ger is a Jew. If you mean ger toishav, he can't be a Jew. So what is he? He is an individual that accepted upon himself to keep the Noahide laws. V'tzarich lekabel olav, and this individual needs to accept it upon himself, bifnei shloisha chaverim, in the presence of three trustworthy, observant Jewish men. Three Jewish religious scholarly men. Now, anyone who accepts upon himself to be circumcised, and 12 months went by, and he still didn't circumcise himself. That might be the most difficult part of becoming Jewish. So if somebody decided that I'll be Jewish, but part of becoming Jewish means he has to be circumcised. And if he's a male and he has to be circumcised and he's an adult, it's not easy. So if 12 months go by and he was not circumcised, hareze kemin ha'umois. So there are different versions exactly to the reading of the Rambam, depending on the more accurate edition and going back to the manuscripts. But what it says over here is that this individual is like any other non-Jew. In other words, he is not in the category of a ger toishav, or worse yet, according to some versions, it's that he is like a min, which is basically a heretic. So if nobody asked the non-Jew to become circumcised, but if he did accept it upon himself, and 12 months went by and he didn't, so then he is not a special individual. Now, the laws regarding a ger toshav are detailed, and it's discussed throughout the Rambam in the appropriate sections where he speaks about various different laws, but just to try to speak of it in very general terms. Basically, the Jewish people do not accept the ger toshav unless the Jubilee year is in effect, and that can only be when all the Jews live in Israel. So the technical ger toshav with the technicality of being an actual ger toshav hasn't been in effect for many years, according to the Rambam at least, ever since the middle of the first temple. He says so in a number of places, about 4 places or something in the Mishneh Torah, that we do not accept a ger toshav unless it's the time where we have the Jubilee year. And what is the ger toshav? Basically, it's the non-Jew who has a right to reside in the land of Israel. And the Jewish community has to treat him very fairly and in many ways as part of the Jewish community. He's not Jewish, but he has to be treated in many ways as part of the Jewish community. That's, in very general terms, the deal with the ger toshav. Next, I'm sorry that we are doing the last 2 halachas in this chapter. We're doing number 10, and now we're up to number 11. This is the last halacha in chapter 8. Kol ha-mekabel sheva mitzvos. Anyone who accepts 7 commandments, those are the Noahide commandments, and he's going to list them in the next chapter. V'nizhar la'asoisan, and is careful to do them, to keep them. Harezeh, behold, this individual, this non-Jew, who accepted them and is careful to actually keep them, he is mechasidei u'moisa olam, from the pious of the nations of the world. He's not a regular person. He's above average. He is considered a chassid. In English, that would be, they translate it as pious. V'yesh lo chelek lo'olam haba. And he has a portion, a share in the world to come. Vihu, however, this is she'yikabel oisan, that he accepts them, v'yase oisan, and he will keep, and he keeps them. Mipnei shetziva b'en HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Torah, because the Holy One, blessed be He, because God Almighty has commanded them in the Torah, v'oidi anu, and has informed us, al yidei Moshe Rabbeinu, through Moses our teacher, shebnei Noach mikodim nitztavu v'hen, that the Bnei Noach originally were commanded. So in order for this person to fall into the category of chasidei u'moisa olam, it is not sufficient that he accepted them and that he keeps them. And it's not even enough that he accepts that they're God-given. He has to accept that God commanded through Moses at the giving of the Torah, in the Torah, and these are the commandments that were originally given to Noah. Avo, however, but imason, if he does these 7 commandments, mipnei hecher hadas, because of his understanding, because logically they make sense, they are rational commandments. Ein ze ger toshav, this is not a ger toshav that we spoke about in the previous halacha. Ve'ein mechasidei u'moisa olam, and he's not from the pious amongst the nations, as we just spoke about in this halacha. And then again here we have 2 versions to how to read the last 2 words here, and it's a very big difference. V'loi meichachamehem, and not from the wise amongst the nations. He's not a ger toshav, he's not from the pious amongst the nations, and he's not from the wise amongst the nations. However, a different reading, which seemingly is the more accurate one from the manuscripts, it says Ela mechachamehem. Rather, he is from the wise amongst the nations. So we're not really stripping this person of all positive titles, if you will. So we're saying he's not a ger toishav. He's not from the pious, from the Hasidic Masaylam. Rather, he is only from the wise amongst the nations. And with that, we finish. That's the end of the 8th chapter. And that was sort of the segue into the 9th chapter, where now he's going to introduce us to these 7 laws, and he's going to go into detail to some extent. And if you learn these 2 chapters, you then have at least a general knowledge of what the 7 commandments are, what you're obligated to keep, and so forth. Details, there are many, many details which go way beyond the generalizations of the Rambam, and that's what everybody needs to, of course, deal with and figure out. But it all has to be based on these general laws that the Rambam is giving here. I just want to mention, many people mistakenly think that the 10 commandments are the universal laws, and that's not so. A bunch of them are the same as the 7. They overlap. That's true, but non-Jews don't have to keep them because they're the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments are the introduction that God introduced himself, and that is what he said at Sinai to the Jewish people, the whole world. But this is when God actually made the Jewish people his people, and that is when the Jewish people became what we call Jewish. That was our conversion from just being regular people or slaves in Egypt or descendants of whatever and becoming God's chosen people. So he may have chosen us beforehand, but this is where it actually became realized. And he tells us the 10 commandments then, those were given only for the Jews. I'll just give you one example. Shabbos. One of the 10 commandments is to keep the Sabbath. And as we're going to see later here in these 2 chapters in the Rambam, a non-Jew is forbidden from keeping Shabbos. So how do you deal with that? 10 commandments. No, 10 commandments are not universal. They are only for the Jews. 10 commandments say not to kill. Non-Jews are forbidden from killing. Murder is a transgression of one of the 7. It happens to be that it's one of the 10 commandments as well. But the non-Jew is not forbidden to commit murder because it's part of the 10 commandments. He's forbidden to commit murder because it is one of the 7. And let us begin. Perek Chi'i, chapter 9. Al Shisha Dvarim Nitztave Adam Harishoin. The first man, Adam, was commanded by God with regards to 6 things. He got 6 commandments. Now, all of these are derived from various different words and verses back in the beginning of the Torah in Genesis. And the Talmud reveals to us the oral law of how we see them there. And some of them are more direct or clear. Some of them are more explicit, but some of them are just implicit and or just hints. But again, it's the oral law that tells us exactly what they are. Al avodah zarah. The first one is the prohibition against serving, worshiping anything other than God. Idolatry. Val birkas Hashem. Blasphemy. Not to do the opposite of bless God's name. Val shfichus damim. And bloodshed. Not to murder. Val giluy arayos. And not to commit what we would call, in general terms, adultery. Val hagezel. And not to rob or steal. Al hadinim. And with regards to laws, judging, to have a system of, a court system of judging. Those are the 6. Afal pi, even though, Shekulam heim kabbalah biyadeinu mimoshe Rabbeinu. That all of them are a tradition that we have from Moses. It's part of the oral tradition. These are the 6 God-given laws to man. V'adas noita lahem. And the mind, the understanding, leans towards them. They all make sense. They're rational. Nichlal divrei Torah yeroeh shal elu niktava. Yet, from the Torah, from the various different verses in the Torah, it's clear, it appears, that these are the ones that they were commanded. You know, it's even though a person can say, well, why these 6? They make sense, so I don't need God to command me. Or you can say that, what? These are the 6. No more, no less. These are the 6 that God gave Adam. Hoisif leNoach, he added to Noah, Eiver min hachai, the prohibition of eating a part of an animal, a limb of an animal, which was removed from the animal when the animal was still alive. Shenemar, and just for this one he brings the verse. The other 6 he didn't tell us how we derive them from the verses. This one, he quotes the verse. Ach basar benafshoi damoy lo yisechelu. However, flesh with its soul and its blood you shall not eat. Meaning to say that you are able to eat meat. You just can't eat meat if it still has its life to it. And he's going to go into details of this mitzvah just as he will with regards to the other 6. So I don't want to discuss it at length now, but that's the verse that we learn out Eiver min hachai. Meaning that until then, mankind was not allowed to eat any type of meat. Only fruits, vegetables, things that are naturally grow in the ground. Those can be the source of food. Meat was forbidden until God told Noah, this is the type of meat that you cannot eat, implying that all other meat is fine. Nimtzu Sheva mitzvos. So what we have now are found 7 commandments. That is how we get the 7. 6 plus 1. And this is how it was in the entire world, back from the beginning of mankind, and especially after the flood, by Noah. The whole world. 7 commandments. That's what everybody's got to keep. Ad Avraham, until Abraham. And he was 10 generations after Noah. A direct descendant of Noah, as every human being is. When Abraham came along, Abraham came along. V'nitztava yeser al elu, and he was commanded, in addition to these 7, God revealed himself to Abraham, just as he did to Noah, and he added to Abraham, b'milah, circumcision. So he was given, if you want to call it that, an 8th commandment. Those 7 apply to him. He's a human being, he's a descendant of Noah, but God told him clearly, as it's written in the written law, milah, to circumcise himself and all the males of his household, all of his male children, and all of his male slaves. And he prayed the morning prayer. He instituted that. Doesn't say that he was commanded to do that, but that's what he started. To pray every morning. V'Yitzchak, and his son Isaac, Hifrish Meiser. He tithed. He took 10% of his produce and he gave it to God. And he added an additional prayer, additional to the one of his father in the morning, towards the end of the daytime, towards evening. The Yaakov and Jacob, Isaac's son, Hoisif Gidanoshe, added the prohibition against eating a certain part of the leg of the animal, of the particular vein. It's a specific sinew, and that, the whole story over there of how he was struggling and wrestling with the angel of his evil twin brother Esau, and the angel grabbed him in the leg and wounded him, and from that point on, God says that part of an animal is not to be eaten. That's called the Gid Hanoshe. Vispalel Arvis, and he prayed at night, in addition to his father's prayer of the evening, or late afternoon, and his grandfather's prayer of the morning. So now we have, besides the 7, circumcision, praying in the morning, tithing, praying towards the evening, prohibition against eating that part of the animal, the Gid Hanoshe, and praying at night. So that would be 7 plus 6. Uv'mitzrayim nitztava Amram b'mitzvahs Yiseiris. And then in Egypt, because as we know the story, the Jews ended up going down to Egypt. The whole story with Joseph, and then they all came, and Jacob came. And one of the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob he was from the tribe of Levi, was a Jew named Amram. Amram was the leader of the generation at that time. Amram is the father of Moses and Aaron. Amram also received instructions from God to have additional commandments. And here, the Rambam is not telling us what they are, but he's showing us how it's a process of accumulating more and more commandments. Until Moses, our teacher, came along. That's the son of Amram. V'nishlama Torah al yadoi, and the Torah became complete through him. God then gave all the rest to him. So his father got a whole bunch, in addition to the previous 6 accumulatively, in addition to the original 7. So it was 6 plus 1, which makes 7, and then more and more and more till got another 6. So that would be 13, and then a whole bunch more, and then finally Moses got hundreds when we received the Torah. Phase. We're up to now the second halacha. Ben Noach she'avad avodah zarah. The Rambam is starting with the first one. In the list that he gave us of the original 6 that man was commanded, the first one he mentioned was avodah zarah, idolatry. A ben Noach, a descendant of Noach, meaning any human being, who worshipped avodah zarah. Harei ze chayav. Behold, this individual is liable. All right, so he has transgressed, and he is liable to be punished. And he'll explain later that it's a death penalty, and what type of a death penalty. Vehu, but this is provided sheyavoid kedarka, that he worships it according to its way, meaning the normal, customary way for that particular avodah zarah to be served. See, certain avodah zarahs are served in different ways. There was one called markulis, and the way that they would serve the markulis was they would stone it. That was their type of worship. They would take stones and throw it at this idol. So if someone worshipped a different idol by throwing stones at it, even though their intention is to serve it and to worship it, because that's what they learned from the markulis, but that's not the way that the other, let's say it's the Baal, that's not the way the Baal was served, so the person then would not be liable. Even though they're worshiping something other than God, but because they're not worshiping it, they're not serving it in the normal way that it is normally done, they're not liable. V'chol avodah zarah shebeis din shel Yisrael memisin aleha. And any type of worship that the Jewish court would put a Jew to death for worshipping, Ben Noach nerag aleha. A Ben Noach is put to death as well. So it's very easy to know what type of idol worship a Ben Noach would be put to death for. You just have to go back to the laws of Avodah Zarah, of idol worship, in the Rambam, and you have to see what type of Avodah Zarah, what type of idol worship a Jew would be put to death for, and exactly the same thing would apply for a non-Jew. V'chol she'ein beisin shel yisum misin aleha, and any type of worship or service that the Jewish court would not put a Jew to death for doing that, ein ben noach nerag aleha. So then a ben noach is not killed for that. Ve'af al pi she'ein nerag, although he isn't put to death, asur b'koil, he's still forbidden in anything and everything. Any type of worship other than God himself is forbidden. The only difference is not every one of them is actually going to have the capital punishment. Ve'ein manichi noisoi lahakim matzeva. And we do not allow a ben noach to establish, to put up a matzeva. Matzeva, I guess in English you would call it a monument. I'm not sure if that's accurate in this case. It's an altar made out of one stone. There's basically two ways to make an altar. One is take one big stone. The other way is to collect a whole bunch of stones and rocks and put them together and then make the altar. Originally, prior to the giving of the Torah, making a matzeva, an altar for the sake of sacrificing an animal to God on one stone was acceptable, was fine. But later on, it's not. God says no. So for example, the altar in the Holy Temple, upon which sacrifices were brought daily, was made out of many stones put together. So we, the Jewish people, are not to allow any non-Jew to make a matzeva, which means an altar made out of one stone. Furthermore, he's not allowed to plant an asherah. That is a tree which is to be worshipped. That the whole purpose of planting it is to worship it. And that was apparently somehow connected with those people that worshipped the moon. So there were certain types of trees that they would plant as part of their religion, a part of their worshipping of the moon. So we don't allow an Asherah tree to be planted. And not to make images. And the like, for beauty. In other words, to make an image of a person, to make a sculpture, to make a statue of a person, and even though he's saying it lenoi, it's not for worship purposes, it's for the purpose of beauty. Not allowed. We're not allowed. He didn't say that it's a capital offense, or that it's a capital punishment, but it's not allowed. So we don't let them make a matzeva, we don't let them plant the Asherah tree, and we don't allow them to make images. And he didn't even go into what type of materials, whether it's made out of a metallic type of material, or out of wood, or carved out of stone, but you're not to make any type of an image of a human being. No types of idols. Next, halacha 3. Ben Noach shebeirech es Hashem. A Ben Noach that transgressed the prohibition of blasphemy. Now it's interesting. It's such a severe thing that we don't even want to say it outright. So the way that it's referred to in the Talmud and then here in the Rambam, it's called Birkas Hashem or Shebeirech Hashem, which literally means to bless God, but the meaning is the opposite. In this case, when we say blessed, we mean the opposite. So a Ben Noach that did the opposite of bless God's name, whether he did the opposite of blessing with God's name either is a tetragrammaton name or the pronunciation of Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud, but it's the name that we refer to God Himself, Yud Kei Vav Kei, or Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud, or whether he used a description, a different name of God, and in any language. So if he said it in English, that would be capital G dash D. Chayav. He is liable. Masha'in Kain be Yisrael, which is not the case when it comes to a Jew. So this is one example where it is more severe and more strict when it comes to the Ben Noach. A Jew who transgressed blasphemy, but didn't use one of God's names, or not, but referred to God, would not be capital offense, would not be put to death. Whereas for a Ben Noach, for some reason, we're stricter in this regard, and no matter what, whether he used the name itself in Hebrew, or any of the names, or in any language, as long as the reference is to him, then he is liable. Next, so we touched upon two, Avodah Zarah and Birkas Hashem. Next, Halacha 4. Ben Noach, Sheharag Nefesh, a Ben Noach, a Noahide, a human being, that killed a person, Hafilu Ubar Bimei Imoy, even a fetus inside the mother. So for those that think that it's a very controversial topic nowadays, pro-choice versus pro-life, according to the Torah, there's no controversy over here. It's pretty straightforward and clear-cut. The Rambam says, any Ben Noach who kills any person, even an unborn fetus inside the mother, Neherag Olav, is to be put to death for murder. V'chein im harag treifa. And likewise, if a Ben Noach killed a treifa, treifa means that the person has some type of an internal illness that they are guaranteed to die from this illness within the next 12 months. That's basically what it is. It's a human being that has some type of an illness that he's guaranteed to die. So if a person kills that person, one might think, well, he's going to die anyway in such a short period of time. No. Or alternatively, if someone took an individual and they tied them down in front of a lion, so they didn't directly, personally, physically murder them with a weapon or anything like that, but they put them in a situation where inevitably they're going to get killed, unless a miracle happens. Or he left him in hunger until he died of hunger. So he locked him up in a room where he couldn't get out. He locked him up so he would die of hunger. He would starve to death. Since in any of these examples, he killed him, even though it was not direct and it wasn't instantaneous, but because he was the cause of his death, Neherag, he is put to death for murder. And likewise, if he kills a roidev, now a roidev is someone who is pursuing someone else to kill them. So you're allowed to protect and to save the victim by stopping, not only you're allowed to, but you're actually obligated to, by stopping the perpetrator. However, if you could stop him without killing him, You must. You're not allowed, it's not a free allowance to kill the perpetrator. However, if that's the only means to stop him, then you can kill him. And if you didn't mean to kill him, but you tried to just stop him and he died, that's also acceptable. But if you're able to stop him by any other means, by just wounding him or something, and you purposely, intentionally killed him, Neherag Olav, then he's killed for that as well. That's considered murder, because you didn't have to kill him in order to protect the victim. Hashem can be Yisrael, which is not the case again when it comes to the Jew. When it comes to a Jew, even though it's also forbidden to kill the Roideif if you can stop him without killing him, and it's not acceptable to kill him. However, because the situation is that he is a Roideif, if the Jew killed him, the Jew would not be put to death. Whereas by the Ben Noyach, if he didn't have to kill him, and he could have stopped him otherwise, and he killed him purposely, he would be put to death. So we've now discussed 3 of them. Avodah Zarah, idolatry, Birkas Hashem, blasphemy, and hereg, murder. So we are going to leave it at this point. We are up to, in chapter 9, halacha 5. And here the Rambam will continue with the other laws of the 7 Noahide commandments, to be continued with the help of Hashem. So until next time, wishing everybody all the best and success in learning and promoting, and most importantly, observing the 7 Noahide commandments, and bringing the world to its purpose and goal with the coming of Mashiach now.
Don't forget to register at NETIV.net for the upcoming Noahide Mitzvot and Lifestyle course.